there, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you to all of our NAMIC-Virginia members, supporters, and partners. My name is Lakeisha Lang, and I am the president of the NAMIC-Virginia chapter, and I am so happy to be here with you today. I would also like to thank everyone who has participated in our events and fundraising activities as a chapter, and for those of you who will participate in the events that we have going on through the rest of the year. Today, we are in for an engaging, dynamic conversation with some leaders in our industry who will share insights on the evolution of customer care. The focus of the discussion will be on how we can redefine the employee and customer experience through technology advancements. Today's moderator, Agnes Adolphine, is the Director of Learning and Implementation at Cox Communications. She was born and raised in Antigua and Barbuda and has called the United States home for almost 30 years. She has been in the telecoms industry since 2013, supporting major network systems integration and learning transformation initiatives. She has found innovative ways to be disruptive and reinvent herself. She has recently earned the moniker, First Lady of Talk Radio. She made a brief career change into media and broadcasting in 2011, where she co-chaired an interactive daily talk show in her native country of Antigua and Barbuda. She will showcase her First Lady skills with us today, and you are in for a treat. She stays connected to the community by serving as the Vice Chair of Future Foundation, an organization focused on poverty elimination through the lens of education. She also serves as a success coach for TechBridge and is the Vice Chair for the SCTE's Learning and Development Committee. Agnes, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lakeisha. I am actually humbled to be here among our panelists today, and of course, having you and the rest of the team from NAMIC, from NCTA, and of course from SCTE put on this amazing panel. Before I get started, let me just say it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I want to acknowledge all of the survivors, including you, Lakeisha, for your courage and exemplar of what it means to truly fight. And please be reminded, whether you're an advocate or a woman, go and get tested. There's still time. So shall we get started? We know that the customer journey is something that continues to evolve over time. And in fact, it is no longer just about the customer journey. It is about what does the partnership in life with the customer looks like. And so we must consider the convergence of technology and human skills to make sure that we maintain a sense of balance as we continue to support that customer journey. You will be hearing from an amazing panel today, from Sparklight, from Cox Communications, from IBM, as well as from Charter Communications. So why don't we bring them into the discussion as we get right into it? We have Katie Grist from Cox. We have Kimberly Gibson from Sparklight. If you could just wave and show them your, we have Abbie from Charter, and last but not least, Olu Adegoke with IBM. Welcome to the discussion, everyone. So before we get started, let's just remind everyone that this is going to be an interactive discussion. We'll first lead with some very interesting discussions from the panelists, but in the meantime, we want you to begin to provide your questions in the chat, and our hosts will continue to curate them and make sure that your questions are answered. Shall we get started? Let's go to the first question, panelists. You look like you're ready. And I think everyone would love to know, how would you characterize the relationship between employees and the technology they use in their efforts to provide world-class customer care? Shall we start with you, Abbie?
Sure. I would love to jump in, and I just want to echo everything, Agnes, that you just said about what an honor it is to be able to come spend time with you guys today. So as you heard from Agnes, I work at Charter Communications, and I actually started with Charter back in 2002. So I am a passionate advocate of our industry. And to give you a little bit of context for my background and my area of expertise, similar to Agnes, it is in the training realm. So I support training for our field operations organization, but have also been part of other parts of the company over time. I've done sales and front counter stores, direct sales, so door to door, also dispatch, so all of those support departments, but all in the training realm. So my kind of perspective on this first question, I love this first question about how do we help our employees, or what's the relationship for our employees with the technology that they use to be able to provide that customer care. So when I think about that, I, of course, think about the training aspect and how we're preparing our employees to be able to use the technologies that we have available now. So when you think about training and how we're teaching our employees to use these tools and be successful, that sort of historical model that we used in the past, print out manuals, bring people into the classroom, take them off the phones or take them out of the field to teach them a new technology, a new application, a new piece of software, whatever it may be. That model doesn't really scale with the pace of change that we have now, because we're releasing so many new tools and systems and processes that are needed for us to be able to connect with our customers and give them the level of service that they need, that it's nearly impossible for us to use that sort of legacy model. So for me, I think it's a lot about, like you said, Agnes, that human aspect, like how do we balance the human needs in the equation alongside that technology? And a lot of what we're doing in the world of training is to be able to make more effective and better use of the technologies that we have, like AI, machine learning, VR, and AR, to be able to connect with our employees and prepare them to be able to use these new technologies.
That is really, really thought-provoking. And I know, Kimberly, you've been in the industry from a customer service perspective for quite some time. How would you add to that?
Yeah, I have been in the industry for 30 years. I started very young. I actually have been with Sparklight for 17 years. And I'm most energized when I can collaborate with my team and a diverse group of folks that bring talent and skill and experience that allows us all to succeed. But in the space of that question, it is very difficult, especially in some environments. We're not necessarily cutting edge as a smaller company. We're not the size of a Cox or MediaCom or some other larger companies. And so we make some very specific choices about technology. And will we go from 0 to 100, or is it okay to go to 50 before we get to 100? Because there's a balance to allow the associate to be able to service the customer. And then there's a balance of, just inundating the associate with change. And it doesn't allow them the opportunity to serve the customer at their best. So it is a challenge to balance that. And with technology evolving and upgrades and new technologies coming on front, you got to pick wisely for the best interest of your company and the best interest of your associates who are going to utilize that technology.
So Olu, it will be interesting to have your thoughts here. You are a technocrat and you are in the middle of really working on solutions to optimize speed to market, personalize the customer experience journey through technology. Is there anything that either Abbie or Kimberly said in terms of the relationship between employees and technology that you'd like to reinforce, or perhaps you have a dissenting thought around that?
Yes, absolutely, Agnes, thank you. So again, just to everyone, this is Olu, and I'm a vice president with IBM, and I lead the cognitive process transformation service line for IBM, which means all of the business processes and operations, leveraging AI, machine learning, and other technologies to be able to transform and to streamline those processes so that we can make life easier and simpler for employees. So that's what I do. And one of the big areas that I focus on is obviously customer care. All right. So that's kind of the context for my role. Now, coming back to the question, Agnes, first of all, I agree with Abbie in that technologies in the past has been deployed with the goal that we have to train the agents. How about what about if we can deploy the technologies without having to train the agents, right? So that is a completely paradigm shift, right? And so one of the things that we are doing is to actually begin the journey by trying to envision the kind of experience that we want the agents to have. A lot of people and a lot of companies, they talk a lot about the customer journeys, but very few talk about agent journeys, right? If we can begin to focus on agent journeys, then we can make life a whole lot easier and simpler for agents as we deploy the technology, just as we aspire to make life easier and simpler for the customers. So the best way I will characterize the relationship today is almost like love-hate relationship. Agents love the technology when it works, and they hate it when it doesn't work. When they have to go through 10 different applications, they don't like it. So the best way I will characterize it is love-hate relationship.
And I see all of the agents snapping their fingers as they're listening to that. And you bring up a really, really critical point. All of us are customers. And even the agents are feeling the friction and the challenge of supporting their end customers because they know what good looks like, right? So they have frustration on two ends. But I'm not the expert, Katie is. So I want to bring her in here on this discussion, right, Katie?
You know, Olu stole my tagline. First of all, hello to all of you Virginia folks. I am an Atlanta transplant, as most people who live in Atlanta are. I grew up in the mountains about 60 miles west of Roanoke, and I'm a JMU grad. Played basketball there ages and ages ago. So it's good to see all of you Virginia folks on the meeting today. Since I've been in Atlanta at Cox for 15 years, I've kind of always had the same job. Now, granted, they have given me a better title and a bit more money to go along with those years. But I've always worked in the digital space and I've always worked on care. I would say for the first decade, that was what was digital, right? It was our websites, and we used to have a lot of them, and then we'd shrink them to a few of them. But in the last 2 to 3 years, what digital support means and the channels that customers expect us to be engaging with them on has exploded, right? Like every 6 months, there's a new one that we need to support. So when I think about the rapidly changing digital environment that customers expect us to meet them in, what we're asking of our agents is to, do more and faster, right? Reduce that handle time, handle more customers, cover more, a larger breadth of skills. And what we really need this technology for is to allow that agent to work smarter, not harder, right? It's the ultimate challenge. How do we allow each of our, valuable resources to get more done? And we do that with these strategic investments in technology platforms.
So thank you so much for that. And I love your point and how you anchored it, strategic investments, because we have to be very intentional, and sometimes more, less is more, right? So when we talk about strategic investments, one of the things that come to mind is really, again, supporting the agent and making sure that we provide them with doing things, I'm going to use your words, Katie, smarter, not harder, right? So let's go on to talk about diversity in the workforce and what are the requirements, if you will, to understand and use new technologies that are having impact on our objective to really build a truly diverse workforce. So we want to have our optics on the agent, the employee, the leader who's really supporting the end customer. what are the requirements to understanding that? And I know ID&E is really center for our discussion as a company, as a world. And we're talking about all elements of diversity, cognitive diversity, race, ethnic diversity, preferences, right? So if I could, maybe Abbie, this is an area that you probably have some thoughts around.
I do. I have a ton of thoughts around this. And I think it's a really great question for us all to be thinking about. And just to kind of reinforce, there's just been innumerable studies that have shown that companies who have a diverse workforce have a more vibrant and thriving workforce. And there have been studies done for years all over the globe, many countries, many different industries in the private sector and government sector, showing that companies who honor that need for diversity, not only in the frontline agent level employees, but in leadership, in the technology and engineering space, are stronger. And so I think it's super important for us to kind of understand that and be able to think about how do we articulate in the language of business in a meaningful way to make sure that people recognize the value of that. So one of the things that I find interesting about this is there was actually a congressional hearing in 2019 where it was addressing this question of how do we get a more diverse workforce in STEM fields, so in science and engineering and technology, and so we all know we want to have, as Agnes said, a greater range of people representing us in this space, and how do we do that? So no surprise, the findings of this hearing was that there's not a ton of diversity in the private sector right now in technical roles. So then the question becomes, how do we get there? So I actually want to talk a little bit about our industry. So in the cable industry, we're working on the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF. You may have heard of that. So in this congressional hearing and many other studies and findings that have resulted from the need in the COVID world for people to get connected to broadband, there has been a correlation that has been drawn between people's backgrounds and where they're coming from and whether or not they have access to technology, whether or not they have access to broadband internet connectivity. And there were relationships found between things like, whether someone lives in a rural or an urban environment, or their age or their race or their educational background. And so we have a lot of opportunity to prepare people for these technical roles and get them ready by making sure that we have access to the internet and we have a good, reliable broadband internet connection. So the RDOF, or Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, that many of our partner organizations are working on is intended to getting funds from the federal government to be able to build out more broadband networks into historically underserved areas of the country. And I think that, to me, that is it's such a positive step, because I think that the foundation of what you're asking about, Agnes, how do we get there? How do we prepare people? How do we get our employees ready to use these technologies? Is it's got to start with making sure that everyone has access to the amazing things on the internet and learning, and be able to seek out that knowledge on their own, get access to education, and then be able to join the STEM workforce and get into these roles, whether it's an agent level or an engineering level. So I think, Kim, you probably have some thoughts on this too. So I want to pass the mic to you and hear if you have any counterpoints or additions.
Yeah, in our call center space, I have technical care and customer care, and I'm very fortunate to have an extremely diverse work group from race, gender, demographic, as well as economies. And so I'm very fortunate with that. And we work really hard to coach and develop associates to understand who they are as a person, what are their personal goals, and what are their career goals, and to align those things to get them to their goals. So example, if they're wanting to be in IT support and they don't have that background, we will pay for their certifications. We will pay for other classes that help leverage them to get there. And that's outside of tuition reimbursement. We'll also peer them with their counterparts. The best trainers sometimes are their peers. Their peers coaches go through diversity training and learn how to speak inclusively so that everybody feels that they can participate. Our company has basic principles, and part of that is to cultivate an environment that values and respects different cultures, experience, and viewpoints. And we really leverage that to develop our associates for the next step and next role. We have an inclusion and diversity board, which you mentioned. Recently, we've had the Asian American, Pacific Islander, Hispanic and Latino and other groups. And these are groups of our associates telling their life experiences with other associates. They can ask questions and they can interact with them to learn. Our leaders receive a meeting in a box, and I love that. It comes from our I&D board. It's a PowerPoint that they take you through, and then you can turn around and provide that to your managers, leads, and supervisors, and it's a meeting in a box. Example of those is unbiased training, understanding bias, psychological safety, and talking about how to talk about inclusion and diversity. And externally, as we're looking for applicants, there's a lot of technology going on, AI, machine learning, but our talent acquisition team holds diversity and inclusion certifications because there has to be a human element to some of those things to balance them out so that we're not undoing our efforts through the technology and ending up with the same type of applicant when we really are striving to be diverse. And then our onboarding process also includes I&D discussions. So we really emphasize that in understanding too where the associate wants to go and how to get there. I think my departments have the most upward lift in the sense of promotion from within my group. We have a board in my office, and there's probably 300 people that have worked in my organization that now work somewhere else in the company. And that's just an amazing and great thing to see every day. And we tout that with our associates. And they have an understanding that we value them and what they bring to the table.
Wow. As a leader within your organization who has that lens, we appreciate all of those insights that you've given us. And you've also mentioned augmented reality, actually artificial intelligence, as well as machine learning. And we know that those are two of the most popular tools, if you will, that we see in the customer care arena. And so if we can maybe go a little bit deeper there, Olu, you are one of our resident technocrats here. I'm wondering what are some of the best in class technologies that currently your organization may be evaluating, or in fact, we may be evaluating holistically as a customer care sort of industry?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Agnes. I will look at it from two perspectives. So one perspective is some of the technologies that are already here today and different customer care organizations are adopting, and the penetration is obviously beginning to kind of take off. And I think one of it obviously has been around AI and machine learning, which is obviously very broad. But I will even focus within AI, the NLP, the natural language processing part of it, is one area that I see very, very promising in terms of how different customer care organizations are beginning to leverage that from the perspective of whether it's through like a voice bot to be able to increase self-service for customers by improving the containment rate. But the more exciting part of it for me personally is actually being able to leverage that to predict friction in customer experience and proactively resolve those frictions before it actually becomes a problem. So for example, when a customer is trying to submit an order or an agent is trying to process an order, the ability to even recognize upfront that this order is likely to fall out and being able to proactively resolve that before it becomes a bad experience that a customer now needs to call or complain for whatever reason, or the ability to be able to predict when an installation will not be able to take place or when you will have a missed appointment and be able to correct that proactively, to me is really very, very exciting. And I think from customer care and agent experience as well as customer experience, I think both of those to come together in machine learning and NLP's ability to be able to predict friction. So that's one piece. Then the second piece that I will also talk about in terms of when we begin to look at the horizon, I think blockchain is very promising. It's still at a very early stage, but the fact that blockchain can be leveraged for payments a lot of issues that we deal with in customer care has to do with payments, right? And the fact that blockchain can kind of help to streamline that, as well as contract as well, because blockchain also have smart contracting capability. A lot of issues that we also deal with in care also has to relate to the contracts. When the contract begins, when the contract ends, da, 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 da. So I think blockchain is very promising. And then the last but not the least is AR and virtual reality, which I think the panelists have mentioned. Very promising. Why? Because now that we are in a work from home mode, remote learning is going to be very critical. And AR, VR can definitely help with that, as well as remote support as well. It allows us to be able to reduce the number of truck rolls. It allows us to be able to increase first call resolution. So I think AR, VR definitely is very, very promising as well. So those are the three.
Oh my goodness, you're speaking my language. I'm just like so elated. You're like, oh, it reduces the friction and we don't have to roll as many trucks. I mean, you're speaking our language. And in fact, I felt like we had a telepathic moment because I saw Katie in the background getting excited when you talked about reducing the friction. So I can't wait for her to add and build on that because she's just bursting at the seams to do it.
You know, we've all, been in a scenario where AI has helped us and we've been annoyed by it, but we also love it. Last night I was watching the Braves game, go Braves, and my husband was telling me he needed new golf shoes. And what do you know? It's in my Instagram feed this morning. I don't need golf shoes, great. But I say that because even though that's a thing that bugs us and that is sort of creeping its way into our daily lives, it's also infecting the customers and agents' perception of what service should be, right? We should know, we should be gathering all the data about a customer's experience and using that to make it seamless, to make it easier, right? I want you to know that I tried to reboot an hour ago and that, I don't want you to ask me to do it again. So I think leveraging this kind of holistic AI moment that we're in our personal lives and applying it with, the B2C and B2B moments is really what the customer's expectation is. And companies all over are chasing that down, are trying to figure out how to leverage it in the best way. And when we do it well, it is a moment of delight, right? It's an area to build a brand on. It's a way to connect with your customers, to use AI and to build kind of a human connected experience that really can be a game changer.
And that is such an important comment there. How do we really use it in a way that creates human connection and really meets their needs, right? Which is essentially what we're doing. Let's talk a little bit more about that because I think our listeners would want to know, how can we be more active participants in creating this best hybrid approach of blending AI with human wisdom and insights? And I think if you could maybe share with us from the perspective of the consumer or customer, as well as the agent, how might we really use that more intentionally as a force for good?
Yeah, that's a great question. The year that Cox embraced and launched our first virtual agent program, we also went through a major rebrand. And, the tagline coming out was, we want to create more moments of real human connection. So here's Katie trying to launch a bot at the same time as we're promoting human connection. Those two things felt like they were at odds at first, but they really, really aren't. And Olu, I'm going to steal it again, whether we're talking about customer-facing AI or internal agent-facing AI, what we're seeing is that when we do this well, we have happier agents. They churn less, right? They get more done. Their day is less stressful. We certainly have happier customers. We resolve their issues with fewer touch points and we're more respectful of their time. When we think of AI as a human element, what we're really saying is that we've onboarded a teammate who never needs to sleep, who never takes lunch, who can handle all the easy things. When I was thinking about this question, I remember being in Hampton Roads in the call center, several years ago, and I'm sitting with an agent and they were, you know, head on desk. If I have to do one more password reset, I'm going to throw my monitor, right? This is the perfect thing for an AI agent and a bot scenario to handle. How do we funnel those complex issues and the things that customers really need to talk with another human about? And we save kind of the noise and the tedium, and we let AI and machine learning handle that. And I think, when we do it well, when there's a healthy balance between the two, what we see are productive and happy and satisfied resources internally. And of course, our customers are delighted that we don't have to burn their time and energy.
So one of the things I'm hearing, or I think I'm hearing, Katie, is that it's important to choose the right technologies and choose them at the right time. So it doesn't seem conflicting or convergent with the overall brand and direction that your company is going in, right? And I think, Kimberly, you may have some things to add here, because I would imagine in your role, you actually probably interact quite a bit with vendors and providers. And it is the double-edged sword, right? So how do you manage the wide range of vendors? I mean, with the technology sort of evolution, if you will, there are a lot of players in the mix right now. And how do you manage and really extract the ones that align with your company's mission and the appropriate timing to support the customer journey?
Very true. A lot of vendors reach out to you via email and phone calls, and you have to kind of be selective. Sometimes I'm selecting them because it's technology I haven't heard of, or I want to know more about, and I will set up a demo and learn that way. Sometimes I leverage the cable center. The C5 group, we are asked what technology things are we wanting to know more about, or these companies are wanting to present to us, and we think here's the value add. So we have those opportunities to have those presented to us. I also leverage my network, my peer group, and in industry and out of industry about what technologies are they using in their call centers, why did they like them, why did they select them, and how are they working for agents? And those are usually some of the top questions that I take into consideration as I evaluate vendors. We're going through a large call center modernization project at Sparklight, where we will evaluate every tool that our agents are using. And because it's so large scale, we are using a third party to gather our criteria and make those selections for us and have vendors present to us. And then we will make a selection from there. But I am also fortunate that I had the opportunity to find vendors myself and bring those forward and bring those resources or technologies into my call centers. I don't have to necessarily wait for at a corporate level. I do try and keep it consistent throughout the call centers because they all call share and things like that. But really try and be wise with my selections, because there's so many vendors and variations and stages in the process.
Yeah, really, really interesting comments there. And I'm wondering, if we continue building on that, how do we make decisions around whether the technology selection is done at the corporate or enterprise level? And if it is, are there any regional or local considerations that need to be factored in terms of what selections you have? And I'll let maybe Katie and Olu, you can jump in here with Kimberly on this one as well. Love to hear from any of you that may have had real examples for the listeners.
Yes, I can go. So yes, so I think, especially like in these days where there is high proliferation of multiple technologies, and every organization now need to kind of decide on what is the strategy that they want to adopt, because the strategy will be, excuse me, the strategy will be one of two things. You are either, as an organization, you want to focus on having very strategic partnership with small number of vendors, but that have a lot of breadth. So that means they can bring a lot of capabilities to you, and that will reduce the number of integrations that you have to do. So that's one strategy. The other strategy is, depending on the size of your organization, you might just want to go for best in class, right? For any capability, you just want the best that is available out there. And that means you are prepared to do the integration, and you're also prepared to leverage those technologies to create differentiated experiences that you want. And that's why you probably want to go for the best in class. Each one of those options, obviously they are pros, they have cons in terms of the total cost of ownership, in terms of ability for you to be able to differentiate yourself. So what I have seen is, to the extent that at the end of the day, at least my point of view is, as I mentioned earlier on, is all about the customer and it's all about the agents. So which means it's all about the people. As long as the technology selection can be grounded on those two fundamental guiding principles, frankly, it really doesn't matter whether it's corporate or a region that is making those decisions. At the end of the day, they will be able to deliver the business outcomes, which is the fundamental driver for those technology decisions. At the end of the day, many technology companies, they are achieving parity in their products very, very quickly. So which means how you actually implement those is much more important than the technology that you're actually selecting as well. So that's the perspective. So Kadi, over to you.
Yeah, two thoughts on that, Olu, and I'll start with where you ended. You know, it's not just about the tool, and so often in digital transformation, we are seduced and attracted to the new thing, the best in class experiences. You know, but it really is a combination of the people and the processes along with the tools that help you make the leap. And those things can be running independently, and they should. The other thing I think is that, you know, as companies digitally transform, they're looking to unwind the many years of development, both on internal tools and with external vendors. Most everyone is looking to reduce the number of logos they have. But I would echo Olu's statement in that there likely isn't one to rule them all, right? What we're finding is the sweet spot of you know, a handful of several major players in a space that can work together, that can integrate well, that can reduce your overall complexity. You know, that increases your speed to market, your ability to be business configurable, but it's not necessarily putting all your eggs in a single tool logo basket, right? So a combination of healthy best-in-class experiences where people are landing, and that evolution, as well as the people in the processes, is what breeds success.
Yeah, spot on. In fact, one of our attendees posted something in the chat that I think underscores that. And said it will also be necessary to point out the importance of having that strong vendor partner management team to work with whatever partner is chosen. And this, of course, is to ensure that there is really good cohesive relationship with the boundary partners, making sure that you are meeting the expectations that have been set forth and mitigating that risk to find a balance between the tool and the essential outcomes that you're driving to. So could not have been stated better. I want to go back really quick and just remind our attendees that this is your moment to really begin to flood the chat box. I don't have a chat bot, but we do have a chat box with the questions that are burning in your mind at the moment. You have the experts at your disposal to answer them. And as Olu mentioned, it is all about the customer. It is all about the agent. It is all about you, because you are our customer in this moment. So I am going to stand by, but in the meantime, we are continuing the conversation. And in fact, one of the big discussions around this whole proliferation of technology in the customer care space and disruption as a whole is how to mitigate and really address ethical concerns that are raised in terms of the introduction of bias. So we want to pivot a little bit, because this is really important for us to address it head on and address the elephant in the room. And maybe we can start off with you, Olu. Is it possible that implicit or hidden bias in our AI-driven customer care tools could be disadvantaging for minorities or those who speak a different language, linguistic diversity like me. Sometimes Alexa doesn't understand what I'm asking, to be honest with you. So, what are your thoughts around that?
Yes. So first of all, I will say yes. I go through it as well many times. It's not unusual for me to call one of my service providers and I try to authenticate myself. And obviously my accent is not acceptable. And I will have to call my daughter and say, okay, can you help me to authenticate myself? So yes, absolutely, it is real. And I agree, it's a very critical issue because the fundamental issue behind this is trust.
Mm-hmm.
And trust, obviously, is going to determine the effectiveness of brands. And so when customers no longer trust because they are experiencing a sort of bias, then it has significant impact on the brand. Now, having said that, we also recognize that humans are also biased as well. So if we recognize the fact that humans are biased, then by default, AI will be biased because humans are creating the algorithms, right, for the AI. However, my view is I prefer AI bias to human bias. Why? Because AI bias, I can see it, I can monitor it, and I can manage it. Human bias, you can't see it, you can monitor it, and it's much more difficult to actually manage. So I think we are up to a good place when we begin to kind of understand the collaboration between human and human and AI combined together, how those two drive decision-making, and then recognizing that one of the critical aspects of this is how we manage the bias that is now inherent in the process. And with many of the organizations that we work with, there are now technology platform tools out there that can actually do that, that can actually monitor that level of bias for you across all of your applications. But more important than that, I think it's also the recognition that within customer care and even the organization as a whole, developing capabilities and competencies around this becomes very critical. For example, developing specific business policies around the ethics of how we're going to use AI, around explainable AI, so that we can understand and explain how AI is reaching decisions that is being made here, we go a very long way. And then once those critical pieces of the policies have been established, then it becomes how do we execute and how do we manage that by using a combination of processes, tools, technology, and having the right organization behind it. But the starting point is humans are biased, therefore AI is going to be biased.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Olu, humans are biased, therefore AI is going to be biased. I think there may be a few folks that were intrigued by your perspective around, I rather know the bias from the AI than the bias that is hard to detect from the humans. I thought maybe we should go a little bit deeper there. And Abbie, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think you were intrigued by the comment as well, because you're in learning and development, but you also came through the customer care road, if you will. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think it's fascinating, and I think you're spot on, Olu, because the humans, we are the ones creating it, which means that anything that's in our minds or in our biases is going to come through in it. But I think you make a great point that by separating it out and looking at the AI biases separately, you almost have a more clinical way to consider it and the ability to tweak it and edit it. And, I think that, to me, I also think about the machine learning aspect too, right? Because if you're looking at these massive data sets that you're sorting through and trying to identify what decisions does the AI make based on this data, if the bias is in there, it's choosing what to throw out or keep in the data set. So I don't know, it's super fascinating.
Yeah, indeed. Before we go on to a really interesting question in our chat, Katie, I wondered if you had any additional thoughts on this around how do you reverse existing bias that has been coded into AI agents, right? And which one would you consider easier? Is it easier to address the elimination of bias up front, or actually revisit and learn as you go along and correct it?
Yeah, I think the key here is that it's a balance between human governance and training and the AI coming together. So if you leave machine learning to run wild, you'll wind up with your top search item being canceled, right? That's not what we want. We always need that human interaction to sort of push customers and ourselves in the way that we want to speak and the way we want to interact. I think what we're finding is, and I agree with Olu and Abbie, we're more diligent and we're more aware because of these AI technologies that we're using, right? How often do we get a daily readout of how each of our human agents is using every piece of language coming out of their mouths or typed through their fingers, right? We're getting that from our virtual experiences. And so it's frankly much easier to curate, to correct, and to train those experiences. Now, I think, you know, we've been very intentional. I saw someone mention language. What we've seen is that if you just let translation turn your English responses into Spanish ones, it doesn't come out exactly right. So we use, you know, our native Spanish speakers and folks within Cox to build out that brand. And then over time, the AI complements and it gets better and better. So I think the marriage of those two things together and that constant vigilance that you just get with an AI tool helps to course correct in more real time than you actually are able to achieve with human.
Yeah, great points around governance and vigilance. Speaking of which, I want to bring Kimberly back into the discussion because she is really having an Oprah moment in her royal purple on the chair. So you obviously have a bit of AI technology in your space. Pablo would like to know, how much integration have you experienced with the integration of AI and agent-assisted space in your environment? So perhaps you could start out, and if there's anyone else that has that, let's hear a little bit about your experience in that area.
We are just dipping our toes in that water. So we have AI through our Chatbot and several other self-service apps, as well as SMS. And those are really in the last 6 to 8 months that we've rolled those things out. But we're very much at a pause, go, so that we can evaluate the human aspect to that, so that all of the AI and machine learning is and the bias doesn't remain in there, so that we have some human element to it to balance those things out, so that the interactions are based and grounded. I used it the other day using other languages in there, as someone had mentioned earlier, and it was an interesting experience because it didn't necessarily correlate. And so, you know, those are the types of things that we need to be aware of as we go down this path and utilizing them. The chatbot definitely has been a better experience, I think, for us and our customers. We have a lot of Spanish-speaking customers, and making sure that those things translate well and accurately to those customers is very important to us.
So let's go a little bit further into that discussion real quickly as we wind down our questions from our audience. But I think there are some custom agent employees that are feeling like technology, and particularly AI, is going to really eliminate their livelihood and their purpose. And I'm wondering if you can really talk about, you know, what is your experience, and particularly how can agents and employees reinvent themselves to really be co-creators, if you will, of this future of work? I'm going to let you all jump in at once. I think
I'll kick us off if you like, Agnes, and that is a great question. It's one as AI managers that we're faced with answering every day. What I can say is that while it's a valid fear, what we're seeing is that we have the same number of employees. They're just evolving, right? And so I think that reinvention is the right word. The best folks to train your AI are the ones who have been handling these, support experiences for the last 10 years. They're the best trainers that you have. And so how are you harnessing, those skill sets and the excellent communication layers that you have in your frontline agents and turning them into digital ambassadors and basically reinventing that workforce. So I think you're hiring for a different kind of role, but you're also evolving your existing talent and leading you towards future digital experiences.
Oh my goodness. I want to have this sophisticated vocabulary that Katie does. So you, look here, you are our digital ambassadors. Don't you forget that. We need you, and you can be co-creators in this future of work. So stay tuned, right? Olu, you want to add to that, because I think this is an area that you definitely have a lot of investment in as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the beauty about this is, as I mentioned earlier on, if we design technologies from the perspective of agent experience, then we will understand that digital agents or AI cannot be standalone, right? They have to be integrated into the workflow of how agents, they manage tasks and activities from beginning to the end. And so that means, for example, when digital agents receives or processes a call, sometimes they might be able to resolve their calls, and sometimes they might have to transfer those to the agents, right? And there is an experience that is being delivered when a digital agent transfers a call to an agent, and agents now is working it and resolving it, while digital agents might also be learning from the agents as well. And so now you begin to execute as an individual agent, you begin to see how your work is shifting to the left, which means mundane task is now being handled by your own assistant. It's almost like you now have your own personal assistant that you are training to be able to handle some work for you, so that then you can then free up time to do the things that your assistant cannot do. And so from an individual agent standpoint, it allows you to begin to now see how you can develop skills in much more cognitive areas or empathy to handle more complex problems. And you will be able to see it, because now it's no longer just you, but it's now a combination of you and your own personal assistant, and how you want to make your own assistant to become much more effective. In the long run, will determine how you also become effective as well.
And who wouldn't want their own personal assistant?
Exactly.
I mean, I certainly do. Frankly speaking, I feel like it's this symbiotic relationship that you want to have between technology and humans. And obviously, humans, we all have the ability to express empathy and those emotional intelligence skills. So fantastic. We're going to wind down because I want to give Lakeisha a moment to close us out properly. Lastly, you talked about blockchain, AI, augmented reality. You talked about how it renders in terms of chatbots and IVR systems to some extent. What trends, if any additional, do we see on the horizon? And if we could do this in 15 seconds or less for each of the panelists, that would be fabulous.
I would highlight one very quickly. This one obviously is still very early stage. We have talked about the application of AI to digitize human agents. One of the things that we are seeing on the horizon now is how we now begin to use AI to actually digitize customers, so that we can then begin to simulate training for agents, where agents are now interacting with AI as customers, as opposed to the other way around as well. And then now the combination of AI and VR and augmented reality now allow and enables remote training that also provides immersive experience for the agents as well.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like I totally agree with you, Olu. The learning experience for the agents is just, there's so much opportunity to transform in that space too. And so, Agnes, I think my answer is personalization of the learning experience, so that we are customizing the learning journey using that same sort of technology, just like Olu said, for our customers, but we're personalizing that journey and making it more the appropriate level for the human interaction for the agent themselves.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you all. Olu Adegoke, IBM VP and Senior Partner, Katie Grist, Senior Director, Digital Care Strategy and Ops at Cox Communications, Abbie Odell, Senior Director, Learning Services and Field Ops at Charter Communications, and last but not least, Kimberly Gibson, our Senior Director of Customer Operations at Sparklight. It has been my pleasure. Now let me punt it back to Lakeisha Lang.
Absolutely. Thank you all for this discussion today. We talked about bias in AI and how to overcome it. We talked about creating digital ambassadors and staying connected to what is happening as our customers and employees' needs change and evolve. We want to thank each of you for joining us today. Stay tuned. NAMIC-Virginia has an upcoming event with our fundraising leg of our chapter, NAMIC-Virginia Cares. Paint for a Cure. It's in partnership with the American Cancer Society. We so thank our partners at the SCTE and the NCTA for all of their planning and partnership that they did for this amazing event. Be on the lookout. Follow us on social media. Thank you again for joining today's session.